Security denies entry to autistic woman, then learns she's the event organizer. The grand hall of the city's convention center buzzed with energy. Bright banners hung from the high ceilings, each proudly displaying the event's name, Inclusive Innovation Conference 2025. This event was the result of months of meticulous planning, and everything had to run seamlessly. It was the first of its kind, a conference dedicated to celebrating inclusivity and innovation, spearheaded by voices often underrepresented in major industries. Outside the main entrance, a crowd was forming. Attendees ranged from business executives to tech enthusiasts, all eager to participate in workshops and hear keynote speeches. Among them was Ellie, a young woman with short blue hair and a mustard yellow dress, standing quietly by the side. She clutched a clipboard and a bag stuffed with documents, her tools for the day ahead. Ellie had been working tirelessly as the lead organizer of this event. It was more than just a professional project, it was deeply personal. As someone on the autism spectrum, Ellie had spent years advocating for inclusion in professional spaces. This event was her chance to show the world how innovation could thrive through diversity. But as Ellie approached the entrance, her excitement quickly soured. A security guard, tall and broad, stepped in her path. "Hold it right there," he said gruffly, raising a hand. Ellie froze. "I'm the event organizer," she said calmly, holding up her badge. "I need to get inside to prepare." The guard barely glanced at the badge before shaking his head. "This entrance is for attendees and staff only." "You don't look like either." Ellie's heart sank. "I'm Ellie Harper. I'm running this event. I have credentials and—" "I said no," the guard interrupted. "Move along. If you're here as a guest, use the side entrance like everyone else." Ellie's face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. She tried to explain again, but the guard's dismissive tone and body language made it clear he wasn't listening. People around her began to glance curiously, their whispers adding to the humiliation. Ellie took a step back, her mind racing. This wasn't the first time she'd faced assumptions about her abilities or role because of how she looked or carried herself. But today was supposed to be different. Today, she was supposed to be in charge. She pulled out her phone, dialing Grace, her trusted assistant who was already inside. "Grace, can you come to the front entrance? There's an issue with security." Grace arrived moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Ellie, what's going on?" she asked, taking in the tense scene. Ellie gestured toward the guard. "He won't let me in. He thinks I said this entrance is closed to unauthorized personnel." The guard cut in, folding his arms. Grace's eyes narrowed. "Do you even know who you're talking to? This is Ellie Harper, the organizer of this entire event. Without her, there is no conference." The guard hesitated, his confidence faltering slightly. "She doesn't look like an organizer," he muttered. "And what does an organizer look like?" Grace shot back, her tone icy. "Someone in a suit? Someone older? Someone who doesn't have blue hair?" Ellie placed a hand on Grace's arm. "It's fine," she said softly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Let's just get inside." Grace's glare lingered on the guard before she nodded. Together, they walked through the side entrance, bypassing the unnecessary confrontation. Inside, the energy was electric. Volunteers scurried to put final touches on booths, tech teams ran last-minute sound checks, and attendees began streaming in. Ellie took a deep breath, trying to push the incident outside out of her mind. She had a full day ahead, and there was no time to dwell on it. She made her way to the main stage, where the opening ceremony was set to begin. As she stepped onto the stage to test the microphone, the crowd's hum quieted. Ellie looked out at the sea of faces, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "Welcome to the first ever Inclusive Innovation Conference. Today is about breaking barriers, celebrating diversity, and proving that innovation thrives when everyone has a seat at the table." The audience erupted into applause. Ellie smiled, her confidence returning. Whatever had happened outside was just a moment, a blip in a much larger narrative. She wouldn't let it define her day. Throughout the morning, Ellie juggled multiple roles. She checked in on workshops, mingled with attendees, and ensured that the schedule ran smoothly. Everywhere she went, she was met with praise for how well organized the event was. Industry leaders approached her with words of admiration, while young innovators thanked her for creating a platform where they felt seen and heard. But despite the overwhelming success, the earlier encounter with the guard lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't just about the personal slight, it was about the systemic biases it represented. Ellie knew that her role as an organizer came with the responsibility of addressing these issues head-on. During a lunch break, she called Grace over. "Can we make a quick adjustment to the afternoon schedule?" she asked. "Of course," Grace replied. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to add a short segment about unconscious bias," Ellie said. "We can move it into the diversity in leadership panel." "It's important." Grace nodded, understanding immediately. "I'll make it happen." When the diversity in leadership panel began, Ellie took the stage once again. She shared her experience from that morning, framing it as an opportunity for growth and learning. "I'm not telling this story to shame anyone," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm telling it because it's a reminder of why events like this are so important. Biases, whether conscious or unconscious, affect how we interact with each other every day. But awareness is the first step toward change." The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Ellie's vulnerability and honesty resonated deeply, sparking meaningful conversations that extended far beyond the panel. By the end of the day, the conference had been hailed as a groundbreaking success. Attendees left inspired, carrying the lessons they had learned back to their own communities and industries. For Ellie, it was a moment of triumph, not just for her personally, but for the movement she had dedicated her life to. As the venue emptied out, Ellie found herself standing by the entrance, reflecting on the day. The same security guard from that morning approached her, his expression sheepish. "Ms. Harper," he began hesitantly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have judged you." Ellie looked at him for a moment, then offered a small smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's never too late to learn." The sun was beginning to set as Ellie stood near the stage, her clipboard in hand. The success of the Inclusive Innovation Conference had exceeded even her highest expectations. Yet, the incident with the security guard had sparked something in her. A renewed sense of purpose to address the subtle yet pervasive biases that existed in everyday interactions. As the final keynote session wrapped up, Ellie approached the stage again, this time for the closing remarks. The crowd, still energized from the day's events, grew quiet as Ellie stepped up to the microphone. "Today has been nothing short of extraordinary," she began, her voice warm yet commanding. "We've shared ideas, broken down barriers, and come together to create something truly inclusive. But as we leave here today, I want to remind all of us that the work doesn't stop when the lights go out." She paused, looking out at the audience. "This morning, I had an experience that reminded me why events like this are so important. Someone assumed I didn't belong in a space that I helped create. And while it was a painful reminder of the biases we all face, it also served as a call to action." Ellie scanned the room, seeing nods of understanding and empathy. Bias, whether it's based on appearance, ability, or background, limits not just individuals but entire communities. It's up to us to challenge those biases, to create spaces where everyone is valued for who they are and what they bring to the table. The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation rippling through the hall. Ellie stepped back, humbled by the response. As she exited the stage, a young woman approached her, holding a notebook. "Ellie, that was amazing," the woman said. "I've always wanted to speak up about these things, but I've never felt confident enough. Hearing you today, it's like you spoke the words I've been too afraid to say." Ellie smiled. "The hardest step is the first one," she said gently. "But once you start, you'll find your voice. And when you do, people will listen." After the event officially concluded, Ellie and her team began the process of packing up. Volunteers dismantled booths, speakers gathered their materials, and the buzz of the day slowly gave way to the quiet hum of cleanup. Grace approached Ellie with a tired but satisfied grin. "We did it," she said, handing Ellie a water bottle. "And by we, I mean mostly you." Ellie chuckled, taking a sip. "It was a team effort. I couldn't have done this without you and everyone else." Grace glanced around the now empty hall. "What's next?" You've set the bar pretty high with this one. Ellie thought for a moment. I think it's time to take this on the road. We've proven that inclusivity and innovation go hand in hand. Now, we need to bring this message to other cities, other communities. Grace's eyes lit up. A traveling conference? I love it. And if anyone can pull it off, it's you. Later that evening, as Ellie returned to her hotel room, she allowed herself a moment to unwind. She sat by the window, looking out at the city skyline. The day's events played through her mind. The triumphs, the challenges, and the meaningful connections she had made. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see an email notification. It was from the security guard who had stopped her that morning. Curious, she opened it. Dear Ms. Harper, the email began. I wanted to apologize again for how I treated you earlier today. I realize now that I let my assumptions get in the way of my judgment. Watching you speak during the panel was eye-opening. You've inspired me to take a closer look at my own biases, and I'm committed to doing better moving forward. Thank you for showing such grace and understanding. Ellie read the message twice, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over her. It wasn't just about the apology, it was about the ripple effect. If one person could reflect and change, then perhaps many more could follow. Over the next few weeks, Ellie and her team began planning the next phase of the initiative. They reached out to cities across the country, partnering with local organizations to host smaller, community-focused events. Each stop on the tour was an opportunity to amplify voices, share ideas, and challenge perceptions. One of the most memorable stops was in a small Midwest town. The local community center was packed with attendees, many of whom had never been to an event like this before. Ellie noticed a young boy in the front row, sitting quietly with a sketchpad in his lap. During a break, she approached him, curious about his drawings. Hi there, she said, kneeling down to his level. What are you working on? The boy looked up, his eyes wide. I'm drawing robots, he said shyly. I want to make robots that help people. Ellie's heart swelled. That's amazing, she said. You know, some of the best ideas come from people who dream big. What's your name? Caleb, he replied. Well, Caleb, Ellie said with a smile, I can't wait to see your robots change the world. Later, during her keynote speech, Ellie shared Caleb's story with the audience. This is what innovation looks like, she said. It's about seeing potential in places others might overlook. It's about nurturing creativity, no matter where it comes from. The audience erupted into applause, and Caleb beamed from his seat. As the tour continued, Ellie's reputation grew. Media outlets began covering her work, and invitations to speak at major conferences poured in. But Ellie remained grounded, always focused on the mission rather than the accolades. One evening, after a particularly long day, Grace found Ellie sitting alone in a quiet corner of the venue. You've been quiet today, Grace said, sitting down beside her. Ellie nodded. I've just been thinking about how far we've come. It's amazing, but it's also overwhelming. Grace placed a reassuring hand on Ellie's shoulder. You're doing something incredible, Ellie. You're changing lives. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. Ellie smiled, grateful for Grace's unwavering support. I know, she said. It's just hard to slow down when there's so much to do. The impact of Ellie's work continued to ripple outward. Stories began to emerge of individuals and organizations implementing the lessons they had learned from the conference. Schools introduced new inclusion programs, companies revamped their hiring practices, and communities found ways to bridge divides. Ellie often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the challenges she had faced, the people who had believed in her, and the moments that had tested her resolve. Each step had been a building block, leading to a movement that was bigger than herself. Months had passed since the first conference, and Ellie's Inclusive Innovation Initiative had become a national phenomenon. The movement had taken on a life of its own, sparking conversations and changes in industries Ellie had never imagined reaching. From tech companies to small-town schools, people were rethinking how inclusivity could drive creativity and progress. Ellie, however, found herself at a crossroads. The success of the movement was exhilarating, but it also came with immense pressure. She had been traveling nonstop, giving speeches, meeting with leaders, and coordinating with her growing team. Every day brought new opportunities, but also new challenges. One day, as she was preparing for a major event in Los Angeles, Grace knocked on the door of Ellie's temporary office. "Ellie, you've got a visitor," Grace said, her tone suggesting this wasn't just anyone. Ellie looked up from her laptop, puzzled. "Who is it?" Grace smiled mysteriously. "You'll want to see for yourself." Curious, Ellie followed Grace to the lobby, where the security guard from the first conference stood awkwardly, clutching a small gift bag. Ellie was momentarily taken aback but quickly composed herself. "Ms. Harper," the guard said, his voice earnest. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "I do," Ellie said calmly. "You were at the entrance of the first conference?" He nodded, his face flushing. "I wanted to thank you. After what happened, I started reflecting on how I treat people. I even went to a few of the workshops you've hosted since then. They've completely changed the way I think. I'm here because, well, I wanted to apologize again. And to give you this." He handed her the gift bag, inside of which was a small, handmade sculpture of a tree with roots spreading into the ground. A tag attached to it read, "Growth begins with recognition." Ellie's heart softened as she looked at the intricate sculpture. "This is beautiful," she said. "Thank you. It means a lot that you've taken the time to reflect and grow." The guard smiled shyly. "It's all thanks to you. What you're doing, it's changing people. Including me." Later that evening, Ellie stood on stage at the Los Angeles conference, holding the sculpture in her hand. As she addressed the crowd, she shared the story of the security guard's transformation. "This is why we do what we do," Ellie said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's not about shaming people for their biases. It's about giving them the tools to recognize those biases and grow beyond them. When we invest in understanding, we create ripples of change that extend far beyond ourselves." The audience erupted into applause, and Ellie felt a renewed sense of purpose. Moments like these reminded her why the work was worth the sacrifices. Despite the movement's growing success, Ellie knew it was time to step back and reevaluate her own well-being. The constant travel and high expectations were beginning to take a toll, and Grace had been gently but persistently urging Ellie to take a break. One afternoon, as they were flying back to New York after yet another event, Grace handed Ellie a folder. "This is everything we need to keep things running without you for a while," she said. "It's time for you to rest." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" "Of course," Grace said with a grin. "You've been running yourself ragged. The movement will survive a few weeks without you. Besides, you need to recharge if you want to keep leading." Ellie sighed, knowing Grace was right. She said. "But only a couple of weeks." Grace smirked. "We'll see." During her time off, Ellie returned to her childhood home in a quiet coastal town. It was a welcome change of pace, allowing her to reconnect with her roots and reflect on how far she had come. She spent her days walking along the beach, reading, and catching up with old friends who reminded her of the person she was before the whirlwind of success. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the waves, her phone buzzed with a message from Caleb, the young boy she had met at one of the early conferences. "Hi, Miss Ellie," the message read. "I wanted to show you the robot I've been working on. It's not finished yet, but it's going to help my grandma get around the house." Attached was a picture of a small, wheeled robot with a simple design but an obvious purpose. Ellie's heart swelled with pride as she replied, encouraging Caleb and promising to visit him the next time she was in town. It was moments like these, small but profound, that reminded Ellie why she had started this journey. The impact of her work wasn't just measured in grand events or media coverage. It was in the individual lives she touched, the seeds of change she planted. When Ellie returned to the initiative a few weeks later, she was refreshed and more determined than ever. Grace had done an excellent job keeping things running, and the team was eager to share their progress and new ideas. One of the biggest updates was the launch of a digital platform for the movement. The platform would allow people from all over the world to access resources, participate in virtual workshops, and connect with others who shared their vision for inclusivity and innovation. "This is going to take everything we've built to the next level," Grace said during a team meeting. "We'll be able to reach people who might not have been able to attend the conferences in person." Ellie nodded, excitement building. "It's perfect. Let's make it happen." As the digital platform gained traction, Ellie's movement grew into a global phenomenon. Messages poured in from people across the world, sharing stories of how the initiative had inspired them to challenge their own biases and create more inclusive spaces. One particularly touching story came from a teacher in a small village in India. She wrote about how she had used the movement's resources to start a program for children with disabilities, providing them with tools and opportunities they had never had before. Ellie read the email with tears in her eyes, marveling at how far the ripple effect had reached. What had started as a single conference had become a catalyst for change on a global scale. One day, as Ellie was preparing for an interview with a major news outlet, Grace approached her with a familiar look of determination. "Ellie, there's something you need to hear," she said, handing her a letter. It was from the mayor of their city, inviting Ellie to receive a special recognition for her contributions to inclusivity and innovation. The ceremony would be held at the same convention center where the first conference had taken place. Ellie's thoughts immediately flashed back to that morning, standing outside, being dismissed by the security guard. It felt like a lifetime ago. "We've come full circle," Ellie said softly. Grace smiled. "And you've earned it?" The day of the mayor's ceremony arrived, and Ellie found herself standing once again outside the convention center where her journey had begun. This time, however, there was no confusion about her belonging. The building was adorned with banners celebrating the Inclusive Innovation Initiative, and a crowd had already begun to gather. Grace stood by Ellie's side, beaming with pride. "You nervous?" she asked. "A little," Ellie admitted, smoothing her dress. "It's strange to be on the other side of it all. I'm used to speaking to inspire, not to accept recognition." Grace laughed. "Well, enjoy it. You deserve this." As Ellie entered the convention center, memories of that fateful morning came flooding back. The lobby looked the same, but everything about Ellie's presence here had changed. She wasn't just an outsider trying to prove herself. She was a leader being celebrated for her transformative work. The ceremony was held in the main hall, which had been transformed into a stunning space filled with lights, flowers, and photos from various inclusive innovation events. People from all walks of life filled the room: educators, activists, innovators, and everyday individuals whose lives had been touched by Ellie's work. When the mayor took the stage, the room fell silent. "Tonight, we gather to honor someone who has not only changed the way we think about inclusion but has also inspired us to act," he began. Ellie Harper's journey is a testament to the power of resilience, vision, and the belief that every person has something valuable to contribute. The audience erupted into applause as Ellie's name was called. She took a deep breath and made her way to the stage, her heart pounding. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside her. "This recognition isn't just for me. It's for every person who has believed in the power of inclusion. It's for those who have dared to challenge the status quo and create spaces where everyone can thrive." She paused, letting her words sink in. "When I started this journey, I never imagined it would lead here. But it's a reminder that small actions can spark big changes. And those changes start with each of us, choosing empathy over judgment, understanding over assumption." Ellie's speech was met with a standing ovation. As she stepped off the stage, she was met by a line of people eager to congratulate her. Among them was Caleb, the young boy who had shared his robot designs with her months earlier. "Ms. Ellie," Caleb exclaimed, holding up a small, functioning robot. "I finished it, and it works." Ellie knelt down to examine the robot, which had a simple but effective design for assisting with household tasks. "This is incredible, Caleb," she said, her voice full of pride. "You're going to help so many people with this?" Caleb beamed. "It's because of you. You made me believe I could do it." As the evening wore on, Ellie found herself in conversation after conversation, each one reinforcing the impact of her work. A teacher spoke of how she had implemented Ellie's workshops in her school, reducing bullying and fostering a culture of acceptance. A corporate executive described how the Inclusive Innovation Initiative had inspired his company to revamp their hiring practices, leading to a more diverse and creative team. But one interaction stood out above the rest. As Ellie was about to leave, the security guard who had once denied her entry approached her hesitantly. He was dressed in a suit, a far cry from the uniform he had worn that day. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice shaky. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. That morning, I didn't just misjudge you. I misjudged myself. But because of you, I've been able to turn things around. I even started volunteering at a local community center." Ellie smiled warmly. "That means so much to me," she said. "It's never too late to grow. And what you're doing now, that's what this is all about." In the weeks following the ceremony, Ellie's movement continued to expand, reaching even more people around the world. The digital platform became a hub for innovation and collaboration, connecting individuals and organizations dedicated to creating a more inclusive world. Ellie, however, remained grounded. She knew that true change wasn't about headlines or awards. It was about the quiet, everyday actions that added up to something greater. And so, she continued to listen, to learn, and to lead with humility. One day, as she was preparing for another event, Grace handed her a letter. "This just came in," she said with a knowing smile. Ellie opened the envelope to find an invitation to speak at the United Nations. The letter described how her work had inspired global leaders to prioritize inclusion as a cornerstone of innovation and progress. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "The United Nations?" she whispered. Grace grinned. "Told you you're changing the world." The speech at the United Nations was a defining moment in Ellie's journey. Standing before representatives from countries around the globe, she spoke of the power of inclusion to bridge divides, spark creativity, and drive progress. "Diversity is our greatest strength," she said. "And inclusion is how we harness that strength. When we create spaces where everyone feels valued, we unlock potential we never knew existed." Her words resonated deeply, sparking discussions and commitments among world leaders. And while Ellie was proud of the impact, she knew it was just the beginning. Years later, as Ellie looked back on her journey, she marveled at how far she had come. What had started as a single event had grown into a global movement, touching countless lives and changing the way the world thought about inclusion. But more than anything, Ellie was grateful for the people who had supported her, for the challenges that had shaped her, and for the opportunity to make a difference. As she prepared for her next event, she smiled, knowing that the work was far from over. There were still barriers to break, minds to open, and lives to transform. And Ellie Harper was ready for whatever came next. Months after the UN speech, Ellie's movement, Inclusive Innovation Initiative, had transcended expectations. What started as a passion project was now a globally recognized force, inspiring leaders, communities, and individuals alike. The digital platform was thriving, with forums buzzing with ideas and virtual workshops held almost daily. Grassroots organizations were springing up in cities around the world, creating ripples of change that Ellie had only dreamed of. Despite the movement's enormous success, Ellie remained grounded, continuing to dedicate time to personal interactions and smaller-scale initiatives. She believed real change began with personal connection, and that belief kept her connected to the very people her work was meant to serve. One evening, Ellie sat on the balcony of her New York apartment, staring at the city lights. It had been a whirlwind of years, and while the success was exhilarating, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still missing something. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was Caleb. "Hi, Miss Ellie. I wanted to let you know I entered my robot in the state science fair, and I won first place. They want to interview me for a magazine. I'm nervous but excited too." Ellie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She immediately responded with encouragement, reminding Caleb of how far he'd come and how his story could inspire other kids like him. After the call, Ellie found herself reflecting on the impact of her work. Caleb's journey, the security guard's transformation, the countless testimonials pouring in from around the world, they were all reminders that what she was doing mattered. But they also highlighted the need for sustained effort. The work was far from finished. Weeks later, Ellie received a call from an unexpected source. A renowned philanthropist, known for his work in education and technology, wanted to meet with her. Intrigued, Ellie agreed, and soon found herself sitting in the office of Marcus Albright, a man whose name was synonymous with groundbreaking innovations. "I've been following your work for years," Marcus began, his tone earnest. "You've done what most people only talk about, creating real, lasting change. I think it's time we partner to take this to the next level." Ellie raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "What do you have in mind?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes alight with passion. "A global hub for inclusive innovation. A physical space where ideas from every corner of the world can come together, where people can collaborate, experiment, and create solutions that drive inclusivity. Think of it as the epicenter of your movement." The idea was ambitious, almost overwhelming. But as Marcus outlined his vision, Ellie could see the potential. A space like that could amplify their impact, bridging gaps between communities, industries, and governments. By the time the meeting ended, Ellie was cautiously optimistic. "I'll think about it," she said, shaking Marcus's hand. "But if we're going to do this, it has to align with the core values of the movement. It has to be accessible to everyone." Marcus nodded, smiling. "That's why I want you to lead it." As the plans for the global hub began to take shape, Ellie found herself diving headfirst into a new challenge. It was a monumental task, requiring coordination across countries, cultures, and industries. But Ellie thrived under the pressure, assembling a diverse team of experts and visionaries to bring the project to life. The hub, named the Nexus, was set to be built in Singapore, a city known for its innovation and cultural diversity. It would feature state-of-the-art facilities, including collaborative workspaces, a research center, and a museum dedicated to showcasing the history and evolution of inclusivity. Grace, ever the voice of reason, made sure Ellie didn't overextend herself. "You've got a great team," she reminded Ellie during one late-night planning session. "Trust them to handle the details. You can't do everything." Ellie nodded, grateful as always for Grace's guidance. "I know, but this feels bigger than anything we've done before. I just want to make sure we get it right." Months of hard work culminated in the grand opening of the Nexus. Dignitaries, activists, and innovators from around the world gathered for the event, which was broadcast live to millions. Ellie stood on stage, her heart racing as she prepared to deliver the opening address. "This is more than a building," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we embrace diversity and work together. The Nexus is a place where ideas have no boundaries, where everyone's voice matters, and where innovation thrives because of, not in spite of, our differences." The audience erupted into applause, and Ellie felt a surge of pride. The Nexus wasn't just a milestone for the movement, it was a beacon of hope for the future. In the months following the opening, the Nexus became a hub of activity. Projects ranging from accessible technology to inclusive education policies were born within its walls. Innovators from around the world flocked to the space, bringing with them ideas that challenged conventions and pushed boundaries. Ellie, while still involved in the movement, began to take a step back from the day-to-day operations. She realized that her true role was as a catalyst, someone who sparked change and empowered others to carry it forward. One day, as she walked through the Nexus, she stumbled upon a group of students presenting their project to a panel of mentors. Among them was Caleb, now a teenager, confidently explaining how his latest invention could assist elderly people with mobility challenges. Ellie watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. Caleb didn't need her guidance anymore. He was leading his own path, inspiring others just as she had inspired him. Years later, as Ellie reflected on her journey, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The Inclusive Innovation Initiative had become a global force for good, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. The Nexus continued to thrive, evolving with the times and staying true to its mission. But more than the accolades, the awards, or the headlines, it was the stories, the countless individual lives transformed, that meant the most to Ellie. Each one was a reminder of the power of inclusion and the potential within every person to create change. And while Ellie knew her journey wasn't over, she was content knowing she had built something that would endure long after she was gone. Ellie's legacy was rapidly expanding, but she remained humble about her accomplishments. She often avoided public attention and preferred focusing on the heart of her work, the people it impacted. The Nexus had become a hub for changemakers, and Ellie found herself wandering through its halls regularly, absorbing the energy and passion of the people who gathered there. One morning, as she entered a meeting room filled with young innovators, Ellie noticed a debate taking place. A young woman with a bright green hijab was passionately explaining her idea for an app that could help visually impaired individuals navigate crowded urban spaces. Opposite her, a young man was voicing concerns about the feasibility of implementing the technology on a large scale. Ellie stepped forward. "Can I join this conversation?" she asked, smiling warmly. The room immediately quieted, and all eyes turned to her. The young woman nodded eagerly. "Ms. Harper, we're discussing how to make public spaces more accessible for people with disabilities. I believe this app could transform how visually impaired individuals interact with their environment." Ellie listened carefully as the woman explained her idea. She could see the potential but also understood the challenges. "What you're proposing is ambitious," Ellie said thoughtfully. "But ambition is where innovation starts. Why don't we break this down into smaller, actionable steps? Test it in one city, gather feedback, and use that to refine your approach." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, and Ellie spent the next hour brainstorming with the group. By the time she left, the young woman's confidence had grown, and the team had a clear plan of action. Outside of the Nexus, Ellie's movement was influencing policy on a global scale. Governments were implementing inclusive hiring practices, corporations were investing in accessibility, and schools were integrating Ellie's workshops into their curriculums. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. But with success came criticism. Not everyone was on board with Ellie's vision. Some accused her of pushing an unrealistic agenda, while others questioned the sustainability of her initiatives. Ellie took the criticism in stride, using it as an opportunity to refine her work and prove her detractors wrong. One particular incident stood out. A prominent journalist published an op-ed titled "The Problem with Inclusion: Why Ellie Harper's Vision Will Fail." The article argued that true inclusivity was impossible to achieve and that Ellie's movement was destined to collapse under its own weight. Rather than respond defensively, Ellie invited the journalist to visit the Nexus. "Come and see for yourself," she wrote in her reply. "Talk to the people whose lives have been changed. Then decide if my vision is unrealistic." To everyone's surprise, the journalist accepted the invitation. He spent a week at the Nexus, interviewing participants, observing projects, and immersing himself in the work being done. At the end of his visit, the journalist published a follow-up article titled, "I Was Wrong About Ellie Harper." In it, he described how his perspective had shifted and acknowledged the tangible impact of Ellie's movement. "Inclusion isn't easy," he wrote. "But Ellie Harper has shown that it's not only possible, it's essential." Ellie's ability to turn critics into allies became one of her greatest strengths. She believed in the power of dialogue and saw disagreements as opportunities for growth. Her approach inspired others to adopt a similar mindset, fostering a culture of collaboration and mutual respect within the movement. One evening, as Ellie prepared for a panel discussion, Grace approached her with a piece of news. "You've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Ellie froze, the weight of the announcement sinking in. "The Nobel Peace Prize?" she repeated, almost in disbelief. I don't even know what to say." "You deserve it," Grace said firmly. "This movement wouldn't exist without you." Ellie shook her head. "It's not about me. It's about the people who've made this possible. The teachers, the innovators, the community leaders, they're the real heroes." "Maybe," Grace said with a smile. "But they wouldn't have a platform without you." The Nobel Peace Prize ceremony was held in Oslo, and Ellie found herself standing on one of the world's most prestigious stages. As she looked out at the audience, she felt a mix of pride and humility. Her speech was brief but powerful, emphasizing the collective effort behind the movement. "This award isn't for me," she said. "It's for every person who has dared to imagine a more inclusive world. It's for the innovators who challenge the status quo, the educators who inspire the next generation, and the communities who refuse to leave anyone behind. Inclusion is a journey, and we still have a long way to go. But together, I believe we can get there." The applause was deafening, and Ellie left the stage with tears in her eyes. She knew the recognition would amplify her message, but she also felt a renewed sense of responsibility. The world was watching and she was determined not to let them down. In the years that followed, Ellie continued to expand the movement. She launched new initiatives, including a program that brought together leaders from conflicting communities to find common ground. The program, called Bridges of Understanding, became one of the Nexus's most impactful projects, fostering peace and collaboration in regions plagued by division. Ellie also focused on mentoring the next generation of leaders. She believed that true progress required fresh perspectives, and she took pride in watching her mentor carry the torch of inclusivity forward. One of her mentors, a young woman named Priya, stood out for her passion and vision. Priya had grown up in a rural village in India and faced countless barriers to education. But with Ellie's guidance, she became a leader in her own right, creating programs that brought technology and resources to underserved communities. "None of this would have been possible without you," Priya told Ellie during one of their meetings. Ellie shook her head. "You did this, Priya. I just helped you see what you were capable of." As Ellie approached the later years of her life, she began to reflect on her journey. She had accomplished more than she had ever imagined, but she remained focused on the future. The world was far from perfect, and there was still work to be done. One evening, as she walked through the Nexus, Ellie found herself in front of a wall covered in photos and stories from people whose lives had been changed by the movement. She traced her fingers over the images, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I never expected any of this," she said softly to Grace, who had joined her. "But I'm so glad we did it." Grace smiled. "You didn't just change the world, Ellie. You showed us all that it's possible." Ellie nodded, her heart full. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it with the same determination that had brought her this far. Because, as she had learned, inclusion wasn't just a goal, it was a way of life. Ellie's movement had reached a point where its momentum was almost self-sustaining. The Nexus was no longer just a hub for innovation. It had become a beacon of hope for people worldwide. Its influence had spread to every continent, with satellite hubs springing up in cities like Cape Town, Tokyo, and Rio de Janeiro. Each location tailored its initiatives to the unique challenges of the region, all while staying true to the overarching vision of inclusivity and innovation. Despite the global reach of her work, Ellie remained committed to personal connections. She frequently visited communities impacted by her initiatives, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. It was during one such visit to a small village in Colombia that Ellie met Miguel, a young boy with a passion for storytelling. Miguel's community had been ravaged by decades of conflict, leaving many families displaced and struggling to rebuild their lives. Yet, in the midst of adversity, Miguel had found solace in creating animated stories on an old laptop gifted by a local nonprofit. "I want to show the world what my village is like," Miguel told Ellie, his eyes brimming with determination. "Not just the bad things, but the good things too." Ellie was deeply moved. She arranged for Miguel to attend a storytelling workshop at the Nexus in Rio, where he could hone his craft and share his stories with a global audience. Months later, Miguel's short film, The Heart of Our Village, premiered at an international festival, earning widespread acclaim and sparking conversations about resilience and hope in post-conflict communities. Back at the Nexus, Ellie's team was hard at work on their latest project, a global fellowship program designed to empower underrepresented voices in technology and policy. The program aimed to provide funding, mentorship, and resources to individuals from marginalized communities, enabling them to tackle systemic challenges in innovative ways. One of the first fellows was Amina, a software engineer from Nairobi who had developed an app to connect rural farmers with urban markets. Amina's work had the potential to transform livelihoods, but she lacked the resources to scale her project. Through the fellowship, she gained access to funding, a network of mentors, and a platform to showcase her work. Ellie personally mentored Amina, sharing insights from her own journey and encouraging her to dream big. Under Ellie's guidance, Amina's app grew into a thriving enterprise, connecting thousands of farmers with buyers and reducing food waste in the process. "It's not just about the technology," Amina told Ellie during one of their sessions. "It's about the people. That's what you've taught me." Ellie smiled. "And that's what you'll teach others." As the years went by, Ellie began to think about the long-term sustainability of her movement. She knew she wouldn't be around forever, and it was crucial to ensure the work continued without her. She convened a council of leaders from diverse backgrounds, tasking them with shaping the future of the Inclusive Innovation Initiative. The council's first major decision was to establish a foundation dedicated to advancing inclusivity through education, policy, and innovation. The foundation would oversee the Nexus and its satellite hubs, ensuring they remain true to their mission while adapting to the ever-changing needs of the world. Ellie took a step back from her day-to-day responsibilities, trusting the council to carry the torch. It wasn't easy. The Nexus had been her life's work, but she knew it was the right decision. One day, while visiting the Nexus, Ellie stumbled upon a group of school children touring the facility. The guide was explaining the history of the movement, pointing to a photo of Ellie on the wall. "That's Ellie Harper," the guide said. "She started all of this." A young girl raised her hand. "Is she still here?" Ellie smiled and stepped forward. "I am," she said, kneeling to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Lila," the girl replied shyly. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Ellie's heart swelled. "You can be. Just remember, it's not about being like me, it's about being the best version of yourself. And never let anyone tell you that you can't make a difference." Ellie's influence extended beyond her lifetime. Decades later, the Nexus remained a symbol of hope and progress, its walls adorned with the stories of countless individuals who had been inspired by Ellie's vision. Her name became synonymous with inclusion, and her principles were taught in schools around the world. But Ellie's greatest legacy wasn't a building or an organization. It was the countless lives she had touched, each one a testament to the power of believing in others. From Caleb's robotics to Miguel's storytelling, Amina's app, and Lila's dreams, Ellie's impact rippled through generations. As she approached the end of her journey, Ellie found solace in knowing she had done her part to make the world a better place. In her final years, she spent her days mentoring young leaders, writing about her experiences, and cherishing the moments of quiet reflection that had become rare in her earlier years. One evening, as the sun set over the Nexus, Ellie sat on a bench overlooking the city. She was joined by Grace, who had been by her side through it all. "Do you ever wonder what's next?" Ellie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Grace smiled. "You mean for the world or for us?" "Both." "Well," Grace said, "I think the world is in good hands. As for us, I think we've earned a little rest." Ellie nodded, her heart at peace. She didn't have all the answers, but she didn't need them. She had faith in the people she had inspired, and that was enough. As the city lights twinkled below, Ellie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had lived a life of purpose, and she knew the journey would continue long after she was gone.